My literature review is on hereditary cancer in a Hispanic-American population. But first I want to talk about culturally competent care. Culturally competent care is healthcare that meets the individual needs of each patient. This means adapting culturally, socioeconomically, and linguistically. One of the areas that culturally competent care can be applied is in genetic counseling. Genetic counselors are healthcare providers that help individuals navigate and order genetic tests. This can be in a variety of settings, such as prenatal, pediatric, adult, or cancer clinics. The area I'm specifically going to look at in this literature review is culturally competent care in a Hispanic-American population who's undergoing genetic testing for cancer risk. My literature review focuses on how we provide culturally competent care to Hispanic Americans when testing for hereditary cancer risk, and if there are any gaps. The first article I looked at was Racial and Ethnic Disparities in Awareness of Genetic Testing for Cancer Risk. This research article starts by saying that not all demographic and socioeconomic groups have benefited from the growing use of genetic counseling and testing for cancer susceptibility. In particular, racial and ethnic minorities display considerably less use of genetic counseling and testing for cancer risk than non-Hispanic whites. Therefore, these researchers wanted to see if there was a difference in awareness of genetic testing for hereditary cancer risk between ethnic and racial groups. They also wanted to see what other independent factors might cause a difference in awareness. They looked at a population of volunteer respondents to a CDC-run national survey. In total, they had 25,000 individuals. They used data from the 2005 National Health Interview Survey. This survey asked questions on demographics, health status, and health behaviors. They found that the percentage of people who are aware of genetic testing for hereditary cancer syndromes did vary by race. While 48% of white respondents were aware of genetic testing, only 30.8% of Black respondents were aware, only 27.7% of Asian respondents were aware, and only 19% of Hispanic respondents were aware. Other demographic factors that affected awareness were education level, the length of residency in the United States, the geographical region of the U.S. that the individual lived in, and whether or not the individual had a family history of cancer. However, while 71.4% of the difference in awareness between white and Hispanic individuals could be explained by other demographic factors, there was still a substantial gap due to ethnicity alone. That much of the difference in awareness can be explained by other demographic factors helps show us that caring for everyone equally will take, as they put it, improvements in the basic elements of our social infrastructure. However, there is still a gap due to ethnicity alone, and that shows that perhaps awareness initiatives in culturally relevant media and native languages could be useful. One of the strengths of this study was that it had a large population size, which makes it more externally valid. It also took a parametric look at multiple independent variables. This is important because it was looking at a complex real-world issue. However, this study did have limitations. For example, not all the surveys were returned. Therefore, the results may be biased toward those willing to participate. The survey could also not ask about all the variables that might influence awareness, such as the person's preferred media sources or their access to a physician. Independent variables that were studied might also be interacting with each other. And the racial ethnic categories that the researchers used are very broad, which increases generalizability but decreases internal validity. Cancer also has different prevalence rates in different populations, and these rates should influence the different amounts of awareness in those populations, which is something that isn't looked at in this study. The second article that I looked at was Prevalence and Type of BRCA Mutations in Hispanics Undergoing Genetic Cancer Risk Assessment in the Southwestern United States, a report from the Clinical Cancer Genetics Community Research Network. Just a little bit of background. BRCA1 and BRCA2 are genes that help repair damaged DNA and therefore suppress cancer. When there's a mutation in one of these genes, an individual is more likely to develop breast cancer. This mutation can also be passed down to that individual's children. In this research study, they first started by saying that breast cancer is the most common diagnosed cancer in Hispanic women and the leading cause of cancer death. Although the incidence of breast cancer in Hispanics is less than in non-Hispanic whites, Initial studies have shown that more of this cancer is caused by those BRCA1 and BRCA2 mutations. Therefore, the researchers wanted to see what the prevalence of BRCA mutations among Hispanics in the southwestern United States was. They also wanted to look at the prevalence and type of mutations in order to see how that should affect how we do cancer risk assessments. The researchers looked at two populations. The first was a clinic-based population of 746 women referred to the clinics because of personal or family histories of cancer. The second was 492 individuals that had had breast cancer and were enrolled in the Northern California Breast Cancer Family Registry. For all of these women, they sequenced their BRCA genes. They also tested for a particular rearrangement, and then large rearrangement mutation testing was done on the clinic cohort. They found that 9 recurrent mutations that have been seen in the Mexican-American population accounted for 53% of the mutations seen by the researchers. X912del was particularly notable, and this was one of the first founder mutations discovered for the Mexican population and one of the most frequently population-specific large rearrangements that's known. Large rearrangement mutations actually accounted for 11% of the deleterious mutations in this population, and overall a mutation prevalence of 25% was found. Because of the recurrent mutations, the researchers said that a Hispanic-specific gene panel might be useful to save costs. Large rearrangement mutations are not detectable by sequencing alone. Since they were found in 11% of the cases the researchers saw, we should be sure to always screen for them. As a side note, while the large rearrangement mutations used to only be screened for in certain cases when the study was published, this is now considered recommended, so this has been updated. A 25% mutation prevalence is also higher than expected. Perhaps this population should receive additional testing, as is done with the Ashkenazi Jewish population. This is a strong study. The population size is impressive. In fact, it's the largest study of Hispanic BRCA mutation carriers to date. The population was also sampled from clinics across the southwestern United States, which is stratified random sampling and lets us assume that these are not local familial mutations, but are in fact mutations inherent to the population. However, it does have some limitations. Many of the individuals were separated from their extended families. Therefore, the amount of information that they had about their family history, which is used in cancer risk estimations, was sometimes limited. They also found a higher prevalence of mutations than is accepted in previous models. While this in itself is not a limitation, the researchers' work would be strengthened by being repeated. Therefore, some conclusions from this literature review. Hispanic Americans are less aware of genetic screening for hereditary cancer syndromes, and while this can be explained by multiple demographic factors, it can't be explained completely. Hispanic Americans as a population also have a higher prevalence of breast cancer caused by BRCA mutations, and they show different recurring mutations than other populations. Therefore, culturally competent care for this population has gaps. We still need to increase awareness and make sure we're screening the population appropriately. For my capstone project, I'm going to be working with a population of Hispanic American individuals with BRCA1 and BRCA2 mutations at Wake Forest Baptist Medical Center. Specifics of my study question are yet to be decided on, but I'd like to increase culturally competent care by gathering information or creating resources. Here are some of my proposed questions so far. This population is aware of genetic testing for cancer risk. They came into Wake Forest Baptist Medical Center. So how did they find out? How much did they know before coming in? And what language did they learn about it in? One of the limitations mentioned earlier was that Hispanic American individuals may be less aware of their extended family histories. By evaluating family trees taken in clinic, how prevalent and influential is this issue? Thank you for your time.